Okay, let's have a discussion here about pro-social behavior. And there's approximately 5 games I had you look at that detail the differences in pro-social behavior between Homo economicus, Homo socialis. One of them was the ultimatum game. And Michael has given me some comments in the chat about just to clarify some things that happened in the first study of the ultimatum game. And that was, why was there a higher rejection rate for the 40 to 50% than 30 to 40? And my answer to that is it's a small sample size. That's purely an anomaly. If you think about it, here's how you should think of it. Most of the offers above 20% are accepted, over half of them. But every once in a while, you get somebody who, in this class, I called it the Kevin spectrum. We had the Brody to Kevin spectrum of people and how much they care about fairness. If you get somebody who's all the way to the Kevin side of the spectrum, they're going to reject any offer that's unfair. And so this interval from the 40 to 50%, even though most of the time those offers are accepted, there could happen to be one person who rejects it, and that would throw off the rejection rates. But I will say, in general, overall, the rejection rate is decreasing as the offer is increasing. There is no sort of weird effect when you get close to 50%. That is just a small sample size. Remember that original study was the first one done. There have been hundreds done after that. And the best thing to do is look at something that takes a survey of the research on ultimatum games. And that's the paper that I asked you to read from Colin Kammerer and Richard Thaler did that. They sort of analyzed not just one study, but lots of studies of ultimatum games. Okay, that's my answer to that. You guys have any other questions? I mean, I feel like we talked a lot about these games, but we stopped when we didn't have much time to talk about the trust game, the gift exchange game, or public good games. So let's talk a little bit about those before the quiz. I'm going to ask you about them on the quiz, but I don't know, today's your lucky day. I'm going to help you with some of the material that will be on the quiz by just talking about it now. Hopefully it's not a surprise though. You knew I was going to do this. Let me share lecture 7 pro-social behavior.
Fucking quiz again.
Here we go. I think you can see it now. We made it pretty far through these slides. Remember we talked about the honesty papers. Talked a lot about the ultimatum game and fairness. Didn't have that much time to talk about this. Talked about the dictator game and the differences. We did talk about this paper. This is about where we stopped last class. And let's just real quick summarize some of these results about trust and what it has to do with reciprocity, actually. What do I mean when I say trust? What do behavioral economists mean? Hopefully you can tell that it's about what is it exactly that you're trusting the person. You can think of trust in a lot of ways. I have a secret I'm going to tell you, and I'm going to trust you not to tell anybody else my secret. It's not exactly that. It's more about I'm trusting you not to take advantage of me in the future somehow. And that doesn't have to be an explicit way. In other words, it's not that I write a contract that says you're not allowed to, you're not allowed to have your cattle graze on my land. I'm trusting that you won't do that, but you might be sneaky and let your cattle graze on the land anyway. If we could write a contract that says, yes, I will allow your cattle to graze on my land for this much time, then it stops being about trust, because we have something in play that I could prove. If I catch you on my land sometime when you said you wouldn't be on, I could I could prosecute you for doing that. I think trust is usually about the times where you can't write a contract, where it isn't possible to write about every single thing that could happen, but I still want to trust you to work together with me to make it better for us both. And I think reciprocity is very related to that. If I'm nice to you, I'm helpful to you, I expect you to be helpful to me, and we'll both be better off. And that's considered positive reciprocity. Negative reciprocity is a thing too. Negative reciprocity is when somebody's mean to you and you decide, I'm going to, even if it costs me, I'm going to strike back at that person and do something negative towards them. A lot of lawsuits have this flavor. Sometimes when you sue somebody, not because it really helps you, you're not getting a lot of money out of it, you're just hurting the other person. And those are actually the kinds of lawsuits we would like to avoid. Okay. Well, let's talk about what self-interested people do and how to separate their actions from their beliefs. Do you think a self-interested person would be trustworthy in this sense that I'm talking about, the behavioral economics sense? In a place where we can't write a contract. Of course, a self-interested person will obey the contract because they know they'll get in trouble if they don't. But what if there's no contract? There's some gray area, and I can do it. I can exploit you and get some of my own payoff. I see Michael and Alexandria say, no, I agree with them. I think there's something inherently untrustworthy about a self-interested person. Now let's ask about, would they be trusting? Would a self-interested person be trusting in the first place? What do you guys think? James says no, only if they gain something for it. Alexandria, that's a good answer. How do they know if they will gain something for it? I guess I have to tell you about the environment. Let's think of the trust game. The trust game, you should already know what it is, but one person, two people start a game with $10 each. The first person can send money to the second, and whatever they send is tripled. So if you send all $10, that $10 becomes 30. Then the second player can send any amount of that money back. So if you send $10, it gets tripled to 30, and they say, okay, I'm going to give you 15 of that 30 back. Then you started with 10 and you increased your payoff to 15. Whereas the other person, they increased their payoff a lot too. So both parties can benefit from this sort of transaction. But the second mover is under no obligation to return any money whatsoever. So if you get stuck with a self-interested second mover, you're going to lose all your money. And the question is, would a self-interested person who's acting as the first mover choose to send any money to the second? And James said no, and I think maybe, let me talk a little bit about maybe why James said that. It's because you think they would expect the other person not to send any money, right? Back, not to be trustworthy.
Right, that's why I said no.
I think it's a pretty common assumption. In other words, that if you yourself are not trustworthy, then you expect other people not to be trustworthy. That's actually a documented thing. We've done experiments. We, the academic community, have done experiments where we test that. We say, okay, I want you to predict how many people would be trustworthy in this situation. And now I'm going to put you in this situation and see how trustworthy you are. And of course, there's this really strong correlation. Everybody thinks that they're normal. Everybody thinks that they behave the way most people behave, but it's not true. I mean, okay, it's true for most people, but it's not true for a lot of people. The least trustworthy people are also the least trusting because they think others won't be trustworthy. So that's true with James, with what James has said. But I think Alexandria's comment is maybe perhaps even a little more accurate, which is that if a self-interested person expected everyone else to be pro-social, like if you know you're the only self-interested person in a group full of pro-social people, then of course you should be trusting.
Does this
And
kind
they
of tie
do.
back to the golden balls game where people are kind of cooperate like half the time?
Sort of. I will say there's an important difference in the golden balls game, in which case it's always better for you to steal. It can't be worse for you, and it's might be better for you to steal in golden balls. So that's a question of cooperation. Do I want to cooperate with the other person to avoid the bad outcome of us both stealing? Whereas in a trust game, there's this opportunity for benefit, of mutual benefit. I guess it does kind of sound like cooperation, doesn't it? But it's sequential. I have to put my trust in you, and you have to be trustworthy back. And if that happens, we both benefit. You know what? It is kind of like a game of cooperation. It just has this sequential action to it. And it's also not, here's what I just want to say. It's not a weakly dominant strategy to be self-interested, to not cooperate. That's the difference. Here, let me say, in the trust game, it could be profitable to quote unquote cooperate. I don't really think it's cooperate. Whereas in Golden Balls and the Prisoner's Dilemma game, it can never be profitable to cooperate. It can never be better to cooperate than it is to defect. But that's not true in the trust game. In the trust game, if you're the first mover and you send your money to the other person, hoping that they will give it some back to you, it could be profitable for you. And okay, I think that's it. That's a discussion of that. What would a pro-social person do? Well, of course, if they're trying to maximize something, everyone's payoff, and they're the first mover, they're gonna send their money and hope that the second person sends it back. So we have a pretty stark contrast between the prediction of self-interested person and pro-social person. What actually happens when you play this game? Let's look at it quick. You should have already seen it. Oh, this is another. Why should we care about this slide? Kenneth Arrow says trust is the lubricant of the social system. Do you know why he says that? Why did Kenneth Arrow say that? He's a really smart Nobel Prize winning economist. It's because you can't write a contract in every scenario. If we had no trust in each other as a society, we would not be able to engage in commerce the way we currently do. We wouldn't be able to engage in producing and consuming goods and services that make us all better off, and in what we call the economy. You know, the whole mechanism of the economy relies at least somewhat on some trust. For example, when you buy something, when you buy food, you have to trust that they made it the way that you expect them to, in a safe, healthy way. Yes, there are food inspectors that come and check, come and verify every so often, but they don't check all the time. You know, you can never be sure that they're not going to cut all the corners to make this food appear a certain way, but actually it's really cheap and not good. You have to have some trust that they won't do that. And the same is true for a lot of contractors that you hire. You hire someone to do a job, you have to trust that they'll do it in a reasonable way and not just take advantage of you somehow. And it does matter for economic growth. The more trust there is in a country, that's what these researchers found. And guilt aversion is another example of this, taking trust maybe to another level that says, what if I'm not just sort of expecting you to return money, but but you promise that you will. That's an even stronger thing. It's not, you don't have to hold. You could break your promise if you want. What do you guys think? Would it matter if you're playing a game and someone says, trust me, I promise, if you give me this money, I'll promise I'll give some of it back to you, and it'll be worth your while to give it to me. Would that make a difference? I kind of think the answer is obvious. You trust them more. Michael, you're saying if the person made a promise, you would trust them more, right? Yeah. Yeah. I get more sus when a person says trust me. Sus means suspicious, doesn't it? I heard Alexander Ocasio-Cortez say this when she was playing the imposter game. What's it called? Among Us yesterday. She had hundreds of thousands of viewers on Twitch. And yeah, you are sus of the person who you think might be the imposter. I get this lingo. Yeah, yeah. Okay, so I understand why you might think that, Alexandria, but I have the data from this series of work by Gary Charnas and Martin Duffenberg, who say actually, no, you're not more suspicious. You're more trusting of a person who can make the promise. And furthermore, the person who made the promise is more trustworthy. It helps. It helps in both cases. Okay, but the canonical game, the canonical game of this literature was done by Berg et al. Called the Trust Game, and that's the one that I made the video about. And if you, hopefully you watched the video and you saw these results. Let me summarize these results for you again. I don't know why I'm repeating this stuff from the video, but look at this bottom one. 94% of first movers send some money. 94% of people think that they could trust this person to send some money back, at least some money. And the average amount, this is including the zeros, I think, including the zeros, the average amount sent is $5 out of 10. People are sending over half their money to this other person, knowing full well that they don't have to give any of it back. But still, that says something about us, that we kind of look for opportunities to make us better off in a pro-social way. Remember, that's what this lecture is about: identifying ways people are pro-social in a way that would not be predicted by standard economics. This is a way we engage in mutually beneficial transactions, even when there's a potential for exploitation that would ruin it for us. We still sort of trust that the person we're dealing with won't exploit us. Were we right? Well, only slightly right. We were only slightly right when we believe this, because 57% of the time people send money back. But that means, you know what that means? 43% of the time they don't. So a lot of people that play this game, the trust game, they probably feel like suckers. They sent this money and they got nothing back. 43% is actually high. That's a lot of people who are just like, yeah, screw it, I'm taking all the money for myself. I usually say that the amount of people who are purely self-interested is about a third. That's my go-to approximation. Like a third of the people, they just always do, no matter what situation you put them in, they will always do the thing that's self-interested. And so in this game, it kind of seems like there's, it's even higher than a third. But I will say this, sometimes in games like this, I know from experience, sometimes in games like this, people interpret things different than how you expected them to interpret them. And I will say this: let's say somebody only sends you $5. They have $10, but they only send you $5. You may be sort of annoyed at that. You may be kind of angry. Instead of thinking, well, they sent me $5, they didn't have to send me anything. Like 0 is my reference point, and I'm thinking, oh, 5 is good. It could be that 10 was your reference point. You expected them to send all $10. Maybe because that's what you would have done. If it would have been you, you would have sent all $10. They only sent 5, and you get sort of annoyed at that. And the way you respond to that annoyance is to say, I'm all right, I'm not giving you anything. Right? And that does happen in this game. I've played this game enough. I've had my students play it. Sorry, I didn't have you guys play it this year, but it's pandemic semester and everything. Okay, that's the trust game. Any other questions about that? You should have already known about it from watching my videos. The gift exchange game is also about this reciprocity, isn't it? You do something nice for me, I'm going to do something nice for you. Here, it's usually thought of in the labor market context, where when you give people, I think I said this in my video, but this was actually inspired by real observations about labor markets in the 1950s, 1960s. And then it was written about in 1970 by a guy named George Akerlof. Sorry, that citation is not on my on my slide here, but if you're curious, you can go look up George Akerlof, efficient wage. You know, he wrote about how wages that are higher than the market wage may actually be better for the firm because people see it as a gift and they respond with higher effort than they need to. Okay. And I actually have done some research in this gift exchange. I've done 2 papers, and I'll talk about my first one. Everyone likes to talk about their own work. I won't talk about my second paper, but my first one, which is now old, now was published in 2013. What we found was that people who are setting the wages, they don't realize that it would be better for them, out of their own self-interest, it would be better for them to give the highest wage, as high of a wage as you can. And the reason is because the higher your wage, the more effort your employee gives you back, and it's worth it. It pays off. At least on average, it pays off. And this is kind of like what James was saying before about people who are not trustworthy are also not very trusting. It's kind of the same thing. People who are self-interested, they expect other people to be self-interested too. And that's why they kept giving these low wages. But, do you have a comment, or is this just a mistaken unmute? I think it's a mistaken unmute. I'm going to mute you, Kevin. Okay. What did we find? We found that if you can send a message, if the workers can send a message to the firms, they say, if you had given me a higher wage, I would have responded with a higher effort, but you blew it. You didn't. And this advice, they say, like, oh my gosh, you know, maybe you're right. I should try that out. I should try giving a higher wage, and it works. And over time, everyone benefits from this. The workers get paid more. The firms have their workers give higher effort, and so it's sort of, we call it the gift of advice. I thought it was a cute title. I actually don't think I came up with that. I think that was my co-author who came up with that title. Okay. Any questions about gift exchange? I don't know what their time is like, but the last game that I wanted to highlight the difference between pro-social and self-interest was public good games. Did you watch this video? I coupled this with the discussion of punishment, because I think public good games by themselves are really like just a study of cooperation again. But when you add this punishment to it, it becomes a more interesting, more complicated game where it's about whether we expect everyone to contribute in a group. Let's say you're in a group, and is it the case that we all expect everyone to contribute, and if somebody doesn't, we want to punish that person for doing it, and we would be willing to sacrifice some of our own payoff or some of our time to punish? If you've watched a video, you see the answer is yes. In general, people are willing to punish. And in public good games with punishment, it tends to increase the contribution, not because punishment is used a lot, but the threat of punishment is good enough. I'll say this on another slide, but if you don't know what the public good game is, maybe you didn't watch the video, but this is the payoff. You need to just think of it as everyone's making a decision whether to keep the endowment that they have or contribute some of it to a public account, and the public account makes it grow, and everyone benefits from the public account. But the game is still designed that the self-interested thing to do is to keep all the money yourself, not to contribute anything. So I answered this own question. My bottom bullet point here: what would a self-interested player do? Keep all the money for themselves, contribute 0. What would a pro-social player do? Contribute all the money. So once again, you have this really stark contrast between a self-interested person who keeps all the money for themselves and a pro-social person who contributes all of their money to the group account, the group good. What actually happens when you play this game, of course, is something in the middle. Yeah. Asian reality shows punish you with very bizarre things. Yeah, there's a Saturday Night Live clip from the 1990s where Mike Myers plays a Japanese game show host, and one of the penalties is people have to cut their fingers off. It's pretty gross. I shouldn't even be talking about it. Sorry. Okay. It's a different kind of punishment here. So in these sorts of public good games, the way you punish is by you pay, let's say you pay $1, but it makes the other person lose $3. Or you pay 10 cents, but it makes the other person lose 50 cents. So it costs you something. You lose 10 cents, but the other person has a bigger loss of 50 cents. And if it's worth it for you to harm that person with the punishment, then you'll do it. And you might say, well, no one's actually going to punish. It costs them. Why would somebody waste 10 cents? This is kind of like the Kevin Brody spectrum again. Someone like Brody would be like, no, why would you ever punish? It just costs you money. Doesn't make any sense. Where someone like Kevin would be say, yeah, it's worth it to punish. We need to enforce fairness norms in this community. And here's somebody who's violated those norms, and it's worth it for me to pay the 10 cents to punish the person who violated the norms. Okay. That's a long way of saying that sometimes people punish. But it depends on the person, of course. Yeah, is punishment a credible threat from Homo economicus? The answer to that is no, right? It's not credible. Credible means, should I actually expect you to do it? If you say you're going to do it, can I believe you? If a Homo economicus says, I'll punish you if you don't contribute, that's not credible. But from a pro-social person, it is credible. And what we find in these games is that there's enough pro-social people that the free riders tend to, the Brody Kevin spectrum should be part of the course curriculum. Yeah, I will incorporate that from every course from here on out. 10 years from now, I'm teaching behavioral economics. Like, okay, on the left side here, we got Brody. Just imagine a guy who you will live on forever in the lore of this class. That would be funny. Yes, he likes it. He wants to live forever as an example in my class of somebody who's self-interested. Okay, here's the answer again. Here's my answer. Maybe in a repeated game, a self-interested person would punish, but not in the last round of the game, they certainly wouldn't. What happens in these public games, good games, is that there's a decline. Look at this last bullet point. I think I mentioned this. I mentioned this in my video, and I'll reiterate it now. There's a decline in contribution over time. How do you explain that? Why do people give less and less and less to the public good over time? I think the best answer is conditional cooperators, because a lot of people are willing to cooperate, but only if you think other people will respond together, to cooperate with you. And if there are some free riders in the group, a free rider is by definition somebody who benefits from a public good, but is not willing to contribute to it. Of course, that happens in group projects too. If you guys have ever had a group project for school, and there's 4 people in the group and one person doesn't do any of the work, but still gets as much of the grade as everybody, that's kind of a bad way to assign grades, in my opinion, in a class, because of the free rider problem. Economists are aware of the free rider problem, and they put things in place to try to avoid that. But yeah, that's one thing that can happen in sort of public good games. Ostracizing. I've seen some interesting papers here where you actually ostracize somebody if they're not going to contribute to your group, just kick them out of the group. And that works, by the way. And they want to come back in often. So, and just so this threat of being able to ostracize somebody is actually a good way to foster communication. And if you think about early humans and living in their tribes, and they're all sort of working together to make their lives better, you could easily imagine every single one of those humans being terrified of being ostracized from the group. If they had to go, if the group said, all right, get out of here, we don't want you in our group anymore, they're living on their own and trying to hunt and gather and survive, and it would be very hard. So yeah, we care a lot about ostracizing. Okay, Is that it? Oh, I did this experiment in a previous class, and punishment and communication really helped. It really increased the contributions in the public good games, as you can see. This was my graph. I'd like to show you this graph about conditional cooperation. What it means is what you predict that other people will contribute, it's a good indicator of what you'll contribute, as evident by this positive line. The slope, the positive correlation here says that people contribute a lot when they expect others to contribute a lot. And once they realize, hey, there's some free riders here, they stop contributing. And this is my graph. Of course, punishment is, you punish people more when they contribute less, obviously. Maybe what's important in this graph is that people actually do punish. Even when it's costly for them to punish, they still do it. And it's because they're on the Kevin spectrum. The Kevin spectrum says it's worth it to punish people. If justice is served, that's what you care about, justice, not your own payoff. Okay, I think that's it. And then you get this slide here, which is a summary. I think I need you guys to probably take your quiz now, right? What is it, 110? Yeah, I want to give you plenty of time for the quiz.
You could just skip it.
Skip it? Oh, but then you'll miss out on all those points. You all get 0 out of 10 for the quiz. Is that what you're saying?
Or no, don't read it all.
Oh, don't take it all. This is an easy quiz, I think. Especially if what I just said to you made sense. I think it'll be easy. Easier than the midterm. Although people did okay on the midterm. I mean, there was a big spread, but the median score in the midterm was 80. Maybe I expect approximately the same median score on this quiz, but I think you guys will do all right. I'll stick around for any sort of clarifying question you might have, like what did you mean when you said this? But sometimes if you're trying to get me to give you the answer, I'm usually I don't fall for that. Okay, can I make the quiz available? In which case, you should be able to take it. I'll make I don't know when I'll make the deadline. The due date will be a little bit later, so if for some reason your internet's not working, can't take it right now, you'll have a little bit of time to find yourself a good internet connection and take this quiz. I will go to make assignment available. Okay, quiz 4 should be available now. I'm going to look at it too and make sure I didn't mess up something. But I'm going to mute myself, so chat with me if you need to ask me something.